Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Hi again, everybody, and welcome to Soul and Survival podcast, and welcome to you, Louise.
Hi Grant, how are you going?
Yeah, not too bad. Okay, so you've got pen and paper in hand. What's up?
Okay, what's up? Well, this is a good morning because it's really nice. It's a Sunday, which is nice, and probably should be no work at all. And this is kind of work, but it's fun as well, so that's good. We've just been watching part of a podcast, Robert Epstein with Joe Rogan, and, you know, the first half is a bit conspiracy theory, not theory, I think fact, but it then really rolls into interesting concepts like what is the brain, what is consciousness. Epstein talks about this concept of transduction. He mentions the senses and how the human body is a massive transductor of information, eyes, nose, ears, mouth and touch. And I said to you, well, it's, as you say, everything's homeopathy and you'll get going on that in a minute. But I said to you, it reminds me of how important the generals and the modalities are because they're our interpretation of our senses, you know, the pressure, the heat, the cold, the taste, it's a whole part of our body that can relate to a remedy and help us find the right remedy. So that's a lot to start with. So you were saying some fabulously interesting things. So I'll pretty much shut up and let you go.
Well, I'm not really sure what I was saying, so you'll need to refresh my memory because I mean, you just sort of will watch things and then you just sort of say, how does that relate, or does it relate, or whatever, and so I just give an answer, but I'm not sort of really thinking about it. It's just off the cuff.
I think I know where I can start or ask you to start, because this is where you started. You were listening to it, you paused it, and then you said, this reminds me of something that happened to me a long time ago. I was probably a teenager, and it was a story about a dog and some flies. So why don't you start with that story?
Well, that's an awful story.
Yeah, but it really got you thinking, and you said, and I agree with what he's saying about what the brain is, and this all links to homeopathy. So start with your dog story and see where it goes.
What he's talking about essentially is that, this multiverse theory, that essentially that the universe is all happening, but it's limited by your senses, and so your senses just keep you in this one universe, which is where we're meant to be. This is what we're here for, is the experience of this one universe. But in order to keep you here, then, and to experience the material, then, all of these connections to the eternal have to be cut off. Otherwise, you just, a bit like a video game, you just sort of go, oh, okay, I'm sick of this. Not that I really know, because I haven't played a video game in 30 years, but you can just take the headset off or put the controller down, just say, I've had enough. I mean, I suppose we can do that now anyway, but you can do that as the gamer, knowing that you can come back to it at any time. But when all of those avenues are cut off and you have to finish the game because you don't know whether you can restart the game again, well, then you're kind of committed to it. Right, so it cuts you off, because that's what we agreed to. If you're going to take it from a really spiritual point of view, is that we all agree to that this is the experience that we want to have. We need to learn something from it, But in order to have that experience, we can't just stop it at any time we want to and come back to it. We have to experience the true limitations of materialism, and if we still have that connection to the limitless, then you can't expect to experience limitation, you know.
So we both control it but don't control it at the same time. So tell me, go and start with the dog story, because that, maybe it's not a very pleasant story in a way. It's all right. It's not that bad. Just tell us about the story and your thought process from that point and how it all fits in, particularly with homeopathy.
Well, it's one of the things sounds odd that you would start a journey at this point, because
it's quite serendipitous, really.
I don't know how old I'd be. I'd be about 16, I reckon. All right, so let's get the not so pleasant part out of the way. So just walking my dog at the time, and this dog decided to do what dogs do, and it just decided to take a dump, right? So anyway, that's not the important part. The next thing that happened was that out of nowhere, all of these blowflies just came out and just started doing what blowflies do around what came out of the dog, out of all of this dog crap. But, okay, what's so fascinating about... Well, I guess fascinating's not exactly the right word, but what got me pondering is that they weren't there a couple of minutes ago. They weren't there 30 seconds ago. How did they know? So it started me on this idea of understanding that blowfly has a completely different set of senses, and as a result of that different set of senses, lives in a world that I'm not even a part of. It is an entirely different universe to the one that I live in. It doesn't know I exist, but its senses somehow picked up what was going on, and, you know, there's that sort of a attraction because it lays its eggs and all sorts of things.
And not just one fly either. Think about it. Where were they? Like, they weren't all just sitting in a cluster on a tree waiting for something to happen. You don't see flies just sitting in clusters. They're always individual, and yet, boom, en masse, they're there.
Yeah, en masse, they were there. And you know, it's... I was... for a while just sort of fascinated by that only because of the symbolism of the different world that this life force lived in, that was so dimensionally different to the one I live in. And so if one creature symbolises, and again, you always got to go back to as above, so below, or the simillimum, right? All life is a simillimum, a repeating pattern. What's happening in one area is happening in all areas. The way life works in one aspect is the way that life works in all aspects. And so, you know, to take it, if one creature that shares the same space as me has a completely different reality and lives in a completely different dimension, even though it crosses over, we're both physical creatures, but the way that it interprets the world and what's important and, you know, what it's going to do is entirely different to mine. Well, you know, it won't just stop at that. It just will be one creature after another, and that's only just the material earth that we understand. So clearly it's a repeating pattern of it's a repeating pattern of all of these interdimensional things. Now there is a crossover though, and that crossover, I think we were speaking about it last time. I don't remember, but we all share the same animation, what in homeopathy is called the vital force. And we know how the vital force gathers information because we know the process of making a remedy. So the process of making a remedy is to succuss and dilute. So what that does is that it breaks down. It's a reverse engineering of how energy works, right? So we know, for example, as a fact, that matter is just energy condensed into such a dense form that it now has weight and it has mass. And that's, when you break that down again, you go back up the scale into the energy part. Now, what should have been the first Nobel laureate, if it had been around, it should have been posthumously given to Hahnemann, because he worked out a way of being able to take that, the way that energy works, and realises that you can reverse that back again, and you can break down energy and release it onto a substance by the simple process of dilution and succussion. And that's all it is. And so then I've kind of lost track now. Where was
you're
I?
talking about different realities, and the fact that the physiology of the fly and the physiology of the person have some crossovers. They're born, they die, they move, they have legs and bodies and heads and all that kind of thing. So there's some crossovers.
We have a completely different diet.
Completely different, definitely a different diet. But so there's a lot of differences in the longevity span and lots of things. I don't even know a lot about flies. These are just minor things I've paid not much attention to.
I don't know anything about them either.
But you make a good point. So I guess because homeopathy is the base of what we do, and it's clearly the way you think. Homeopathy's helped you to think, or perhaps your thinking's helped homeopathy. I'm not sure which one's true. They're probably both true. But so just tell me about that different reality of different beings, perhaps humans in this case, and the miasms and the remedies. Like, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, we do share commonality, because the whole basis of material life is to experience individuality. That's one thing that you do know, because at an energetic level we all share the same experiences, right? So at an energetic level, if you take, and this goes in with what we were talking about last time, let's just take someone from your group. Let's just take the red miasmatic group. Now, that red miasmatic group is found to animate mineral, although I can't think of the mineral right at this. Ammonium crudum.
And crude, yeah.
It animates plant life like thuya, animal life like sepia.
Yep.
And of course human life. So
like
it's
me.
Like you. And so in that sense, there is, when you know that spiritual thing that at the heart of it we're all one. Well, that's true. But at a physical level, we're here to experience individuality. I understand that there's many mystics that are a lot smarter than me, man. But many mystics that turn around and they will say the opposite. They say what we're here for is to experience and the unity and understand that love is everything and so on. Now, I get that bottom line is probably true. But I might just come into conflict a little where the idea that we're here to experience unity. I don't think that's the case. Because unity already existed. Unity exists at an energetic form. Like we were saying, you are sharing the same energy as the cuttlefish, as the arbor vitae, thuya, and as ant crudum, right? So,
and yet, funnily enough, those three remedies don't. Well, I think two of them do actually help me out. One of them doesn't. So, I mean, that differentiation is probably just found through experimentation.
So where does the differentiation take place? Well, the differentiation takes place the moment that energy becomes dense enough to be material. That's when differentiation takes place. The very fact that we exist here on this planet to me, this is where I'm just going to kind of deviate from really, the more spiritual part of it, of unity for all and unity within all, because I don't think that that's the case. I think that the very fact that we're here means that we are here to learn individuality. We're here to learn about ourselves and experience about ourselves, or at least gain knowledge in certain aspects of life that only separation can teach you.
It can allow for. It's interesting because it makes me think, I don't even know what company it is, but there's some company's slogan is same, different, which is complete contradiction, of course, but they're trying to embrace both things at the same time. But you're saying, you kind of can't really do that, not realistically. Perhaps if you split that, you do same things in some areas, different things in others, perhaps.
Yeah, look, not only from an English standpoint is
the grammar's terrible.
Do I not like the way that's phrased, but it's such if that's their slogan, it's a complete contradiction. That was written by a schizophrenic, because it's a complete contradiction of terms. But there's obviously things that we have to experience in the material world that we can't experience in the energetic world. Hunger, for example. And it doesn't, what's the purpose of hunger? Well, the purpose is probably understanding, right? It's about how do you gain compassion for another person's experience if you haven't experienced it yourself. If I talk about hunger, and what I missed out on a whole day's eating and I'm really hungry, you can understand what I'm talking about because you've experienced it before. Any child, any parent that hears about the death of another parent's child immediately can go, oh my God, I hope that never happens to me, which is the first thing that you think of, you poor thing to experience that, because that must be the worst of the worst of the worst. And that's because as a parent, you've experienced the love of being a parent. And so what you gain from that, from this material existence, is this, that you gain a real empathy for other people, which you wouldn't be able to do at just a purely energetic level. That's what I think anyway. Okay.
No, I can understand everything you're saying. If I redirect you back a little bit toward the beginning, and this idea that Epstein was talking about, which is, the brain is just a conductor. It's an energetic.
You probably
conductor.
need to say his first name too.
Sorry, Robert Epstein. It's not a great surname, is it? Given,
well, not at the moment.
Yeah, given the other Epstein.
What ended up ever happening with that too? Nothing ever happened with that.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that don't get explored. They're a bit too difficult, or maybe they do, but we don't hear about it. There's so much information out there. We've become very aware of how much information there is in the world, and I guess again, I'll take it back to homeopathy.
Speaking of blowflies on you-know-what, though, that whole saga stunk to high heaven. Yet nothing has happened.
It certainly did. It certainly did. Will I go back?
Yeah, no, sorry.
That's okay. Will I go back to homeopathy?
There's a background hum. Anyway, keep on going.
Okay. So information overload. I mean, that's what remedies are, just like this enormous amount of information. Like, it's incredible. Hence, we don't like drug pictures and we don't like keynotes, because they're just too limited. We want access to all of the information, but we want to be able to cherry pick what's important. So what do you think the link is in Robert Epstein's idea of almost an empty brain, or it's not creating anything, it's just it's just a channel to flow through, and all the senses in the body, and how we use homeopathy in the clinic? Like, what do you think's important there?
There are two really big belief systems that I think are absolutely wrong to when you're dealing with people. The first is that the body is a machine. We've got this idea that, you know, all you need to do is just understand simple mechanics and now you understand the body. That is not true.
That's the medical model,
right?
Well,
it's a medical model, but it's not true. They've completely got that wrong. That doesn't mean to say that the body doesn't have predictable function. It does.
And in an emergency, a bit of mechanics is very
But
useful.
it's not a machine. It's not a machine like a car. So because it's interactive with all your emotions, all your thoughts, you know, it's yes, it's subservient. So in that respect, it's a little mechanical, but it's responsive like that. It's responsive in ways that we don't even acknowledge, actually. You know, I mean, this is one of the problems with medicine at this time is that, okay, your heart's, you know, or your valve's burned out, you know, let's just chuck it out and put in a new one, which is great. And it bides you time, and that's wonderful. But it doesn't teach you anything about why it got there in the first place, why it reached that position, particularly if you're a younger person, because something, you know, if it's old age and you're just talking about heart valves, well, then you can turn around and sort of say, well, you know, that's just age. It's a pump. It's just it's mechanical wear and tear, and you get down to that. But when you're dealing with people in their 30s, 40s, 50s that are having massive heart attacks, going into renal failure, liver shutdown, and you go through their life, and dietary-wise, you know, there shouldn't be anything accounting for that, then that's when you start to realise you're dealing with a highly interactive sort of creature when you're dealing with the human body. It is not... It's wrong to see it as in the same analogy as plastic and pipes and pumps. It's just not. The second thing that is really completely wrong, but you hear it being said, particularly in the last sort of 20 years or so, is that your brain's like a computer. It isn't like a computer. It's nothing like a computer. Right, so... But what's his first name?
Robert.
What Robert Epstein is talking about is that he's talking about how really consciousness, you can't point to an aspect of the brain and say that's where consciousness lives.
Or memory.
Yeah. And well, you can't even do it with the body. You can't look at the brain and go, oh, that's the deltoid muscle, that little bit there. You can't do it. It's so integrated and so meshed and immersed. You can't just... But I can understand why people do it. I understand why we've come to the conclusion that consciousness is in the brain, because people who have strokes, for example, can lose a big part of their functioning capacity.
Maybe just a pipe's just damaged and the information's not flowing
through.
Well,
that's exactly so. Just because the expression of it is limited doesn't mean that the reception of it is limited. And even if the reception of it is limited, that doesn't mean to say that above that you're still not experiencing it. Well, how is that possible now? The mechanists will go, but and it's a good question. But and how on earth could I know that? Well, you know, when we wrote Soul and Survival,
you wrote it.
All right. The subtitle's The Common Human Experience. And why I did that is because the common human experiences tells us that there's more to life than what we categorise it as. So when you talk about consciousness, for example, I think in the book I talk about déjà vu experiences. Now, déjà vu experiences are really interesting. I find dreams themselves really interesting, but particularly the déjà vu experience, because anyone that's ever had one, and that's nearly everybody, and I'll just explain that a deja vu experience, for those that don't know what it means, is that you suddenly have this realization that you've been here before, or you have this realization that you've dreamt this before. You don't know when you don't turn around and go, on the 8th of March 2019, I remember dreaming. But it's a knowing, and it's different from a dream. It's a knowing. When the trigger hits, when someone says something or someone does something, it's a trigger that makes you think, oh, I've experienced this. And so many people have experienced or had this deja vu experience. Like, I think I say something like in the book, even if you sort of say that most people, let's just say half the world's population, have experienced even just once in their lifetime. Right at this point, that's still 4 billion experiences. But what does science do? Oh, it's all made up. It's 4 billion made-up experience.
That's really just their way of saying, we can't quantify that, we can't monetize it, so therefore it doesn't exist. It's the same argument as homeopathy. We can't quantify it, we can't explain it, we definitely can't monetize it. So let's just shove it to the side.
It doesn't fit in.
Doesn't mean it's not real or
doesn't fit in with the way that we say that it works.
Mm. Well, it's not material enough, Grant. That's the reality.
No, it's not material enough. In fact, it's not material at all, because when you look at the deja vu experience, what has actually happened? What you've done is that something, can't be your brain, by the way, because your brain stayed in your head the whole time you were asleep, didn't go walking through your ears. So it stays in your head. So something outside of the brain has gone into the future, experienced that future, come back into the present, and the mechanisms of the brain, which is to keep most of the universe out, shuts down the memory of it, and then at some future date, when the present becomes the future, you remember that in the past you travelled to the future that you're now experiencing in the present.
It's wild, isn't it?
Right. So something, a consciousness, has transcended all aspects of time, past, present and future, and now you're experiencing that same experience. And it's only fleeting. But the reality is the fact that it happens at all is crazy. It's like, how people will sometimes, you've experienced this, where people will say, oh, look, I don't really believe in homeopathy, but I like arnica, that's really good.
Yeah.
Right? Because they've fallen over, they've hit themselves. We've said, here you go, have some arnica, and they go, oh, actually, that does feel better, or that bruise that I was expecting isn't there. As if for some reason homeopathy's crap, but arnica's okay. Well, the reality is that homeopathy's not a remedy. It's a system. And so with that system, you're either going to, it either works or it doesn't. It either works in an entirety or it doesn't work at all, by the way. So if arnica works, it can only work because the whole thing works.
Mm. And anybody, if you look at the history, and maybe we'll go into some historical figures in the next one, because there's some really interesting things to talk about there too. But if you look at anybody who genuinely, from a scientific point of view, tries to dispute homeopathy through testing its efficacy, those people who are the true scientists, they really, truly apply the process of testing properly and being open to anything that happens. There's no prejudgment there. They're not trying to do anything other than, all right, maybe they're trying to prove it doesn't work, but if they're really doing it properly, they always find out it works. And many of them, I remember Herring was one of these, and then they become the greatest advocates, because in a way a good scientist is a truth seeker. and they're applying the process of truth to find out something, and they find out the truth and then they're blown away by it, because it's a pretty amazing thing, homeopathy, because it does transcend time. I mean, you know that there's stuff in the provings that it's like it's memory, and as you say, memory's not even in the brain. Where is it? Why is memory so highly associated with the senses, emotional intensity? There's so many things to talk about there.
Oh, yeah, it's vast. It's absolutely vast. Yeah.
I probably said too many things there.
No.
So what you're saying, though, is that when you listen to this information being discussed about the brain, about consciousness, the brain being what does he call it? A transducer, I suppose, that it conducts, basically, that you can see how that is homeopathy.
Oh, yeah, and also, I mean, it explains the importance of gathering as much subjective information as what you can in order to get a case. Now, this is one of the biggest
You
problems.
mean subjective for the patient, but objective for the practitioner,
No,
right?
getting the patient's subjective senses.
But for you, it's not you as a practitioner being subjective, which is a bit of a problem in the clinic. The practitioner should always be objective, meaning they're hearing what the patient says, their subjective experience, but they're not imposing their own subjective experience on that information.
Yeah, no, you can. Yeah, if you do that, now you've got it. You're making a mistake now. When you do that analysis, I mean, this is really what Hahnemann was always on about, was that to be led by the signs and symptoms. Stop making ideas and interpretations of it. I mean, the way I think that if Hahnemann was back here now, I don't think he'd be our friend to the average homeopath. He'd be.
He might be your friend. I think he'd like what you're doing.
Well, I hope so, but he won't. He certainly, for this subjective thing about trying to match remedies to people and sort of seeing that, certainly, my favourite animal's dolphins, so I'm going to give them dolphin milk and all that kind. That he would rail against that. Absolutely rail against that. What the basis of homeopathy is that our bodies so sophisticated, and it's always trying to adapt and overcome and harmonise itself in ways that our own brain can't understand, because it's a program. It's already programmed in, right? So you don't have to consciously think about these things. In fact, we can't understand it and the reason that we can't understand it is because the brain is not a computer in the sense that it just processes information. It's constantly, you were talking about, what was the term that you said just before about?
Conductor, transduction.
Yeah, well, I mean, the brain is the interpreter of all the transducers that are in the body.
It's going two ways.
And even though we might not understand how the body is going about trying to re-establish a pathway, we have to trust in nature that it does.
But we also know it's failing, but not because the program's wrong. It's not about that. I think that's what the materialist thinks. Oh, we'll intervene, or even some homeopaths. The program's correct, but the program's failing because there's not enough energy flow to make it work efficiently. Like a car will work when it gets its fuel, but if you don't give it its fuel, it won't work. It doesn't mean the car's broken. You just haven't given it the fuel.
Yeah, that's true, but it also can overdo, right? And maybe this is a good place. I think what we'll do is that we'll stop here and we'll start with the overdoing.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, that was great. Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.